Kia ora koutou katoa. This week I am in Wellington, or the Greater Wellington region, for the majority of the week, and I'll outline a few different initiatives over the course of these introductory comments. Today marks 1 week at level 1, and this week the government's focus remains on our economic recovery as we continue our plan to respond, recover and rebuild from COVID-19. It took us 101 days from our first case of COVID to get to 0 cases in what was a strategy of going hard and going early. This now, however, means we enjoy a post-COVID lifestyle. The Oxford University Stringency Index has us at 22, with the OECD average sitting at 56. Our lockdown was stringent but short, and we are now enjoying more freedom than many others. While we've opened up our economy much more quickly and strongly than most other countries around the world, there's still a long road ahead of us. But economic activity is ramping up, and it comes on the back of consumers having spent more in level 3 and 2 than perhaps was expected. It is encouraging to see people getting out and local businesses getting back to normal as the economy opens up, including rugby matches that were very well attended in both Dunedin and Auckland. But it's rely on a consumer-only led recovery. We need very deliberate and direct interventions as part of our recovery, and that is exactly what our plan does. Last week, for instance, I visited Te Puke to announce government support for horticultural jobs, and in Kaikoura, where the government has protected the strategic asset of Whale Watch, so the community is positioned and ready to go when tourism more fully reopens. And then, of course, in South Auckland, where we invest free trade agenda, which you'll hear specific programs set to benefit in our economic recovery plan, and that's the first tranche of projects that will be fast-tracked through the RMA. It will mean that projects which are already funded can get underway quickly, providing jobs and stimulus across the country. To briefly recap before I hand to the Minister, at the end of April, Cabinet agreed to special legislation to support New Zealand's recovery from the economic impacts of COVID-19. Legislation to fast-track resource consenting and designations so that infrastructure projects can gain approval as soon as possible, a standard RMA process, and start providing job opportunities as a result. Notified consents generally take about 4 to 6 months. Fast-tracking will see them take about 45 to 70 days. In fact, as Minister Parker will outline shortly, some transport projects will now be able to start 1 to 2 years sooner under the fast-track measure. The COVID-19 Recovery Fast-Track Consenting Bill 2020 will be introduced this week. The bill lists 11 projects that will go directly to an expert for the environment and confirmed through orders in council. The first projects have been chosen because they are ready to go, provide at least 1,200 jobs, and because they align with the long-term challenges the government has already was taking on before COVID arrived in housing, the environment and transport. But now I'll hand over to Minister Parker for further details.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Essentially what we're putting in place today is a 3-part fast-track process to speed up projects to boost jobs and economic growth. As the Prime Minister has said, there are initially 11 named projects, some of which I'll run through in a moment, and they've been set out in the press release, and they cover things like transport, housing and water storage. We're expecting the bill to have its first reading this by a short select committee process reporting back to the House, if the House agrees, by 29 June. Once the bill passes, these listed projects, the first track, fast track projects if you like, will be referred directly to expert consenting panels who are chaired by an Environment Court judge. The panel will set appropriate conditions on the projects before they can proceed. The opportunity for further projects beyond those named projects, and that's from the second track, and that applies to applications that can be made by other public entities or private entities to use the fast track process. We're looking forward to a number of projects coming forward from a range of people and organisations, including district and regional councils, iwi authorities, NGOs and the private sector. Applicants will be required to provide information to me as Minister on how it meets the criteria specified in the bill. Projects that are selected will then be passed to the panel for consideration. And Kiwi Rail Holdings to subject to certain performance criteria. As the Prime Minister's already said, notified applications for resource consent around 6 months process, depending on the Environment Court. Projects as a 2 years sooner under the fast track measure on conditions set by the panel. I would stress that while extraordinary times require extraordinary measures, positive environmental outcomes and treaty relationships won't be sacrificed at the expense of speed. While these projects are being advanced in time, environmental safeguards remain, including Part 2 of the RMA, and things like matters of national importance. These will all continue to apply. Similarly, the principles of Te Tiriti of Waitangi and treaty settlement obligations will apply to all projects under the bill. Lastly, I'd make the point that this is a short-term intervention. We are truncating rights of public participation, and that shouldn't last forever. So the appeal in 2 years' time, it's not part of the wider review of the RMA. As you'll be aware, we commenced a comprehensive review of the RMA led by a retired Court of Appeal Judge Randerson QC, which we're expecting to release before the election. The 11 projects range from the Kaikui water storage project, some housing projects in Auckland, Queenstown for example, Papakāinga, network developments, some rail projects which I won't.
All right, happy to answer questions.
Prime Minister, is Aisha Verrall your next Health Minister?
Decisions around Cabinet are made should we be in the privileged position of forming government again. What I, alongside the party, have been part of announcing today is simply what we hope will be. Again, I'm making absolutely no comment on what the future cabinet looks like. Those are all decisions should we be re-elected. But what I'm very proud of is the huge talent that is coming through the Labour Party list. And I think that's a vote of confidence in the role that we've been playing as government, and also demonstrates that as a party we're in good heart.
So do you think Dr Aisha Verrall would make a good Health Minister?
Oh, again, I'm not going to get into any speculation on a future cabinet. Needless to say, we have excellent existing cabinet and excellent prospects for our future cabinet.
Do you rate her though?
Oh, she would not be so highly rated on a Labour Party list were it not for, obviously, for the confidence that she's built amongst a wide range of people who made the decision on the list. She is an extremely competent candidate, but so are a range of other candidates that join her on the list today. Sorry, yes, absolutely.
In terms of the fast-track legislation, you sought support from the other political parties, including National, for a fast track of the legislation.
In the past, the government said that it is the government of infrastructure, and it's got a lot of projects, and obviously you put infrastructure well on your agenda. You've laid out a process where we can have these projects, you said, between 45 and 70 days. Maybe it might be a bit of a technical answer, but why doesn't this just happen with all infrastructure projects, if given the fact that you've emphasized
process for funding, but then they also have to have resource consent conditions attached to them.
Sorry, Jason.
Because most resource consents affect both public and private interests, and public and private people in New Zealand expect to be able to be involved in the process, including generally turning up to a hearing. What we're doing here is requiring things to be dealt with on the papers, and we're also taking away the rights of individuals to submit and leaving those submission rights on representative groups on their behalf. We wouldn't want to do that forever. Balance of the people will be picked for their expertise, so we think that's protected.
How much of a role did the Infrastructure Commission play in the decisions around these new 11 projects?
The projects were put forward by government agencies rather than by the Infrastructure Commission.
But that was the whole commission. Exact reason.
Well, we are in respect of the 1,800 projects which are being filtered, but that task is not yet finished. It takes a while.
It is the priority, and wouldn't it make sense that you use the commission set up specifically for this, for consultation on these projects?
Some of these will also, in order for them to be at the stage that they are, will have been relatively far down the track. And also, in terms of scale, not all of them will necessarily be ones that are engaging in the amount of time and energy and effort that the Infrastructure Commission is putting into determining pipelines going forward. So I think ultimately the process has been to try and identify things that are ready to go.
The final point I would add to the Prime Minister there is, of course, the second track can be used for other projects that come through that pipeline.
These projects, though, did they come from the Mark Binns chaired reference group?
Well, they'll probably be.
Yes, there's that obviously the Mark Binns work, the work of the Crown Infrastructure Partners. We are working through that long list now, which was received at the end of May, and it was a substantial list.
The NZ upgrade package got 1 road, 2 cycleways and 3 rail projects in this package.
Well, we wanted to make sure that the response to COVID doesn't take the nation in the wrong direction. One of the concerns that was expressed when we announced this fast-track process is that we would be building, I don't know, someone said coal-fired power stations and only roads. So we've been deliberate in our attempt to project some balance here so that we have a broad range of outcomes.
Is a conflict of interest that
we have needed to improve, and we've sought to act on that. So to change our approach. And of course, Dr. Verrill has provided opinion as a professional, not as someone within the government, and so she's always had that outside perspective and has been providing us with advice.
It wasn't an interview. As a professional.
Oh, sorry,
no,
Jane.
It wasn't an interview. And about where the government had
Following
gone to.
a-
Shouldn't that be a
Yeah,
declarable
and
situation?
following. I believe she's acted with integrity. In my view, she has. She's acted as a professional with specialist knowledge of infectious diseases. It would be a shame if we can't both utilise her professional opinion in our COVID response and
In any future government.
Can I
that you
just,
meet.
I'm going to preface my answer by saying first that we have just come through a 1 in 100 year global pandemic in which the Minister of Health has been part of the leadership team making decisions that have led thus far to New Zealand being in an incredible position. And I do credit him with the role he has played in that. And so the question you're asking me is whether or not his entire career should be determined by one mistake during that period as opposed to the many decisions he made on behalf of New Zealand. My view is a little more emphasis on the outcome that we have now experienced would be in order.
Yeah, Prime Minister, but you also said that you would have sacked him if you could have at the time.
Yeah.
So will he be a health
Oh, no.
minister? in
And look,
future
I'm happy to
government?
clarify this point. There seems to be some view that somehow once I make a decision, I revise it. I do not. I made the decision at the time. The decision still stands.
How can you talk about gender equity
I'll come back to
and
that just after this.
equality
Yes.
when you just have 6 women in your top executive?
Yeah, so look, in terms of context, I have not changed in this. Placing the Speaker, because he, of course, our cabinet we have today, and that is simply because cabinet is something that I determine when we do cabinet reshuffles, not through a list process. And so what we've generated here with the Labour Party is the look of our entire caucus, and I'm very proud of the fact that based on the best estimates we can make, we will now have a caucus made up of 50% women and extraordinary talent amongst it.
For Māori in your top 20, it's 1, maybe 2 max more than national.
Again, what we've got here is something that I had yesterday reflected today and in this list. But in our wider caucus, we have the most representation from Māori that we have had as a Labour Party, and now we're looking to add to that the talent of, I hope, Ardern Williams and also Shannon Halbert and Northcote. I'm very proud of the diversity in our team, and again, going into the future, increasing the pool of that diversity.
We've got 11 projects announced now. How many more do you expect to go through that second pathway?
The Order and Council process.
A substantial number. We can't put a figure on it, but we'll have a better idea once the funding decisions are made through the sorting of the projects that have come through from the infrastructure group. I'm expecting over a significant number to go through this panel, but it relies upon people coming to us, showing that they're job rich, that they're ready to go, that they've got the funding, and that going through this short track process will actually get people employed, because the purpose of this is employment. So if they haven't got the funding, or it's not going to be any faster than it would be through an RMA process, we wouldn't put it through this process.
Yeah.
Roughly how many projects were you
Yeah.
looking at to cut down to from get to that original that 11? How many were you looking at?
I don't have a number for that. That's a budget-related decision rather than an RMA decision.
The Police Association Chief Chris Cahill has called the passage of the arms legislation bill a life or death matter. So where is it, and when will it return to the floor of Parliament?
Oh, look.
To cut it. A plurality of voices,
Yes, it
as
does.
we have with mainstream.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think probably what's being proposed consulting on is this notion of having a bit of a clearinghouse, but not a reduction in programming. As I say though, it's a consultation, and so the whole point now is to go out, see what the views are of the sector, and to work from there.
The commitment that we won't lose those Māori media services like the Hui.
Yeah, and so that's actually one of the examples I'd give. The intention isn't to reduce the access to funding sources for those multiple programming options. And so that's where I think, unfortunately, that's been misinterpreted. That's not our intention to lose that range of voice and programming options, but to create a clearinghouse for some of these different operations. Yeah, Joe.
Mr. Parker, just on the fast tracking stuff. Given one of the big criticisms around the PGF is often the number of jobs that says it's going to generate and then how many actually come to fruition, with these projects, is there particular job numbers that are set and sort of accountability measures around making sure they actually do come to fruition?
One thing before I hand to Minister Parker on that, keeping in mind, of course, these are projects that are often brought to us by entities like, for instance, local councils, and they are often the ones that are undertaking some of the analysis and providing estimates of job creation. And so that's often what we'll be basing that on. And ultimately, of course, there's only so much responsibility we can take for whether or not some of the work...
The government's not accountable.
Oh, well, again, ultimately, if the idea is and the whole objective is job creation, then we both share that goal. But there will be some circumstances where they may have not had an entirely accurate count on an FTE for a project. The goal is, though, job creation. But Minister Parker.
Well, to give a specific example, the first on the list here is the Kaikoura water storage facility, which is a project of the Northland Council. It has been funded in part by the Provincial Growth Fund. The job estimate there is 70 jobs. Those jobs will be put forward faster because of this legislation than they would have otherwise occurred, but I presume the number's about the same.
Specific expectations, though, on projects? Is there a set numbers, FTEs, that you're actually allocating in order to give it a tick?
They're based on individual project estimates rather than just saying as a result of the RMA fast tracking we would like to achieve X amount of job creation.
Some could be 10, some could be 200.
I doubt if a 10 project would justify this process. You'll see that the lowest number on
30 to 40 for us, one of the cycles.
is 30, but most of them are sort of towards 100 or many hundreds.
On Māori media, do you think it sends the right message to Māori that American film projects like Avatar get the same amount of money from the government as all of Māori media combined?
If you're asking about the rebate, I don't think that it's not fair, I think, to compare what is a rebate based on money spent and then revenue gained by the government in New Zealand to grant funding for broadcasting. First point. Second point, there's a more generous rebate regime for New Zealand domestic screen production, for the very point that we actually do take a different view when it comes to content that tells our story.
Those Māori media spend money in New Zealand on cameras and staff and coffee, you know?
Yes, and when it comes to, and we centrally fund Māori media, what you're asking though is about the incentives regime, which is a different project again. And when it comes to domestic film production, including, for instance, say Māori film, they have a more generous incentive regime than we do for international productions. Sorry, who have I come to? Yes.
If someone tests positive for COVID-19 and it turns out in their infectious period they visited a cafe, and the Ministry of Health has said essentially the only thing they'd be able to do in that scenario is do a public appeal through the media to try and reach people who might have been exposed to the virus. Is that good enough? And
Yeah.
should the government have not lifted that requirement for contact tracing?
So the first thing to keep in mind, of course, is that not everyone carries a device that will enable them to use a COVID Tracer app. And so it's not a foolproof option to make sure that everyone is keeping track digitally or otherwise of where they've been, which is why we make the general appeal to New Zealanders. Please record where you are going, because if we do have that scenario, we do want to know where you've been so we can help other New Zealanders look after themselves. On the COVID Tracer app, we have asked that businesses do display the QR code so that people who have the app can use it. We are seeing an ongoing increase in the number of posters that are being distributed, and the number of people downloading the app continues to increase. You're asking though, should we make it compulsory? That would require businesses to enforce people to either scan or record. Of course, comes with a range of flow-on effects by requiring businesses to be the enforcer. What we are doing is keeping open the option that if we believe it's necessary, that we have that option. In the meantime,
We have that requirement under level 2 though, at least for pen and paper, if not the government app. Why not maintain the pen and paper one?
And simply, at the pen and paper, of course, some people did refuse. It is a public display of people's information, so not an ideal option. What is better, of course, is if people do have the app. For those who don't have it, we ask them to try and keep their own record. Nothing is foolproof. That is why contact tracers on the ground, as the WHO advises, is still the best thing that any country can do rather than just relying on technology.
24 days of no COVID-19 cases. When will we be able to definitively say New Zealand has eliminated COVID-19?
Well, I think the one disclaimer we have to give is that actually this is going to be an ongoing. New Zealand will have cases again in the future. Of course, our hope and expectation is that that should be at the border if it's anywhere, because that's where we still have New Zealanders coming in from around the world where there continues to be COVID. Specialists will tell you that once you're 28-day clear, then you can define yourself in that way. But I don't want New Zealanders to believe that the battle is over when it is not.
What the Minister for Māori Development was proposing is a single Māori news service to be located within the Māori television service. So you're saying that's a clearinghouse,
but it doesn't.
But some would say that sounds like a funnel.
And again, I'm pointing out that that doesn't preclude other programming continue to access other funding sources, which is where they currently many are. And so that's where I'm saying that that we do not wish to see a diminishing of our Māori news and current affairs services.
So on infrastructure,
yeah.
And just as a second to that, of those that are decided, what portion do you expect might be streamlined under this?
I'll answer the first part and perhaps the second for Minister Parker. At the end of May, there are hundreds of projects within it, so we're working our way through, so I wouldn't mind just giving the ability for us to do that as
from Te Māngai Pāho under that
Yes,
centralised model?
yes, that is. All of it is to make sure that we ultimately
the it's on. I know you'll say it's the wider party. What did you seek to do with it?
we're looking to have 50%. Ibrahim Omar, who is a cleaner city.
Panels will have a lot of work to do assessing
And on the need in charge of formulating those panels, but we'll give them the resources that they need to do the task.